going all the way back to the medievals, um, whether you're studying medicine or law or theology, you would have some text. That's what a lectio is. It's a reading. It has to do with some sort of, it's the lecture that you're engaged in has some sort of commentary on a text, that's going to deal with a particular issue. So they're working through this text, and then they're raising different issues as they go. Now, Maastricht would do this in the typical way of raising theses. You would have theses that would be, these are the main points, the main ideas behind this doctrine or this issue, and then you would go through and like any good state of the question, who says what and why, and what does that mean? So as you go through and give those defenses of the theses, by the time you get to the end of the classroom, you would have probably anywhere from 5 to 25 theses that have been worked through in the time frame. Later in the student's education was when they would come back and have to defend it. So they would have to actually come through and say, here's what the proper doctrine is. As a class exercise, there would also be folks, sometimes professors, sometimes students, that would actually kind of play the other argument. They'd raise other questions to see how the student does it. And the professor would be there to preside over the disputation and would wade in. In fact, that generates some comments from other theologians and professors. Yeah. This professor wades in too much. The student had totally botched it. Get out of the way. I need to salvage this particular point. And so this process of moving from lecture and reading and theses into disputation, and then understanding that the publications that are coming out of that process is what you have before you. So sometimes I think moderns pick up these old 17th and 18th century dogmatic theologies or these syntagmas and other collections, and it's a genre confusion.
I see. Sure.
You've just stepped into a doctoral seminar. You've just stepped into a master's seminar, and you're working through a state of the question. That's what you've got here. The translation process is, now how are you going to preach this?
Yeah.
And so what you see in Maastricht in this is exactly that. It is an academic work. Mm-hmm. It's got I would say, a pastoral goal, an ecclesial a goal for the service of the church. But it's given in an academic form.
That's helpful. I think readers are going to need to know that as they're approaching this. And we have here Volume 1, Prolegomena, but then Volume 2, Faith in the Triune God. What can we look forward to with the remaining, I suppose, 5 volumes?
Right. Well, in Volume 3, we'll get into the basically the covenant of works and the fall, and then we move into the covenant of grace. I will tell you that the chapter that he deals with the covenant of grace from the resurrection of Christ to the end of the world is perhaps one of the longest chapters that I've ever encountered, because I estimate that chapter is going to be 156,000 words.
The chapter. Wow. That's a lot.
Yes. So if you want to see Maastricht's church history, that's that chapter, the covenant of grace from the resurrection of Christ to the end of the world, and he's charting, here's what's going on.
Sure.
So they're wrapped into this work dealing with the doctrines is actually here's his understanding of history. Now, he wasn't the only one who ever did that. For example, John Owen's work that was translated, I guess, about probably 15 to 20 years ago now. If you look at that one, that's also has a historical bent to it. So Maastricht's not the only one to do this sort of thing. How do we understand the covenant of grace in history? And then from there, we move into what you might call the more of the questions around moral theology.
I see.
What is sometimes called ascetic theology. Mm-hmm. Here's the virtues, here's the vices, here's the practices specifically. Here's how we should behave towards ourselves, towards God, towards our neighbor. Those are the sorts of things that are coming out in the last in the last volume.
Yeah.
So volumes 3, 4, 5, and 6 get us through here's Christ, the work of Christ. And then after that, that long chapter that I was talking about on the covenant of grace.
Wow.
So a lot coming down the way. The section I'll tell you, the section that he's dealing with on the nature of on Christ and dealing with what it means for Christ to be a redeemer. It's wonderful. One reason, not only because of what we mentioned about practice, but Mastricht really is a gazetteer of what's going on in Reformed thought.
Huh.
What you begin to see is Mastricht says some reforms say this, some reforms say that. Here's where I think a safer path is. Sometimes he just makes the distinction and doesn't comment any further. He just says there's these differences. So what you do get out of Mastricht is he kind of gives you the theological topography of what's going on in roughly 1700 as he sees it, and from the perspective of the Dutch Reformed Church. He's deeply engaged. He does read things that are coming across in English and German and French and other things. So he's got his finger on a lot of different issues that are percolating in his day. So there's a lot here for, I think, pastors. And there's a lot here for those who are interested in this sort of pastoral theology and doctrinal theology. But there's also quite a bit here for scholars. So this text, I hope, will serve in a variety of ways as we consider